Hello, everybody. Welcome to our new week where we focus on China. So we're making a shift from last week where we finished with discussing the arrival of the British into India. Now we're shifting completely. We're moving to a new country and we're starting way back at the beginning again. So we're going back to the Neolithic eras where we begin. If we think of China today, it is a vast territory, very diverse geographically. Many different dialects are spoken. China's huge. It's roughly the size of the United States, but the population is 4 times of that of the United States. So China is very unique. Their writing system is actually what unified China. And we'll talk about the development of that under Emperor Qin. So when we look at China, we're looking at eras, time periods, and dynasties, ruling dynasties. So that's what you'll be hearing me as we move through. Ideally, one of the goals of this section is for you to get an idea of what was typical during a certain emperor's era or during a certain dynasty. So just that general character is what I'm hoping you mostly pick up when we discuss China. So we're starting with the Neolithic era. And this is before we have a writing system. And I'm showing you guys these maps. These little drawn maps that you see here come from the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. And I thought they were really interesting because they show the size in orange of that particular era that we're discussing. So right now we're discussing the Neolithic era, and you can see geographically where that is located. These settlements, by the way, these early settlements, I'll go back to the main map, often take place or develop, I should say, along the rivers. And I want to talk about 2 key rivers in China. These will come up in your reading, and we'll actually look at some works of art next week that reference the rivers as well. Number 1, there's the Yellow River, and then we also have the Yangtze River. So these 2 rivers are very significant. And then as you can see, there's this blue line here, which is like the Grand Canal. And again, that's something we'll talk about next week. Okay, moving on, again, back to our Neolithic discussion. Let me show you a work of art, which gets us started thinking about becoming more visually literate. So this is where, as you guys know, I'm asking you just to look at artwork and just describe the subject matter, describe the visual aspects, describe the style. You don't need a title to do any of that. You don't need any information beyond just looking. And so here I'm noticing there's a face. I'm also noticing some fish. So here's a face here. I noticed some fish that look like they're coming off ears. I also noticed some other fish on the sides. And you see almost like a mirror image on the bottom. You also notice on the outside of the rim are markings. What do those markings mark? Are they referencing north, south, east, west? Are those arrows supposed to be pointing us somewhere? These are questions we don't have answers to because this is done during the Neolithic era when they didn't have a writing system. So we can only make guesses. Now here are some guesses that while I teach this class on the ground and we read through the textbook and do the same sort of activities, these are some of the ideas that we've come up with. Maybe those lines on the edge represent early writing. Maybe that figure that we see, that face, is an ancestral figure. We know that later on in China, they developed something called ancestor worship, where they worship spirits in the other world. And this, as I mentioned, becomes fundamental in their beliefs later on. So often when we don't have information about early cultures, we walk back. So perhaps this is the very beginnings again of early writing, although I wouldn't say that this is writing. This is not complete enough. But maybe it's the start. And perhaps this is also the start of ancestor worship. And perhaps providing an offering in this bowl to your ancestors, they then in turn would assure that you would have an abundant catch of fish. And remember, these cultures were founded along the rivers. So having an abundant catch of fish would have been really important to them. Another medium that developed that we'll see throughout our discussions in China is the use of jade, the interest in jade and jade working. You can buff this to a lustrous polish. Jade comes in more colors than just the green that we often see. In fact, there are different titles and names, but I'm not going into all the geology about that today. But this is called a B disc. And again, if we walk backwards, later on in Chinese history, this becomes a symbol of heaven. At this time, we don't know, but later on it becomes a symbol of heaven. To counter that, we have the thong, which is a square jade object with a hollow tube in the center. And the square, again, later on, will represent the earth. Now, these jade objects are found in burials. As a side note, that's where we find these. The next major era that we discuss in our class that is significant is the Song Dynasty. This is the first great Chinese dynasty of the Bronze Age. So if I ask you a question, or if you're digging into bronze, or if you walk into a museum and you see bronze in the Chinese section, you can generally guess that it was probably made during the Song Dynasty. So the Song Dynasty, and again, here's the map to show you the size, right? It starts to develop a little bit more complete. They developed a supreme deity in which they called Shangdi. And it may have been some sort of a great ancestor, right? Just building on this ancestor worship. Now, the Shang rulers maintained their authority by claiming power as intermediaries between supernatural and human realms. So this oracle bone has an early script on it. It eventually develops into the Chinese characters we're familiar with today. But priests would use these and heat them over fires, and it was a way to communicate with the ancestors or the supernatural realm. And again, this would be human realm on life, or humans on Earth trying to instigate the supernatural. One thing that we know was important during ancestor worship is that you needed to provide your ancestors with offerings, again, so that they could turn around and give you some benefit. So this is a vessel. This is our bronze. It's made out of bronze tripod wine vessel. The Chinese drank wine that was warm or heated. So this would be placed over a fire and would actually heat the wine. Now this is interesting to think about because one, the wine is an offering to the ancestors, but they also drank it. There is evidence that the Song Dynasty and the Shan aristocrats were addicted to wine and addicted to alcohol. There's writing that tells us that they had pools of alcohol. But when you're heating wine in a tripod vessel that's made of bronze, which would have included particles of lead as well, you could get lead poisoning. And that may be one of the reasons why the Song Dynasty collapsed, was due to lead poisoning. But this would be the type of object that they would provide an offering to, like wine. They would also offer grains and meats, and there were other vessel types that were created as well. This is a gong, and again, it's from the Song Dynasty. It's made out of bronze. It is a piece mold technology. It's fairly complicated to explain piece mold just by looking at this object, so definitely check that out in your textbook. And it shows you the various steps that an artist needs to take in order to create these vessels. But this is gorgeous. This particular vessel actually is not in your textbook, but it has some shapes that if you're reading along in your textbook, you'll start to pick up. It has this swirl shape, which is supposed to reference clouds, which was considered an auspicious symbol because clouds bring rain. And many civilizations that are based in agriculture need rain, and it's important. So there are a lot of symbols on this particular vessel. Otherwise, essentially what we're looking at, it looks like it has some sort of a dragon face to the left, and as you follow it to the right, there looks and appears to be feathers of a bird. So it's a composite creature, and made up with some fanciful shapes and other animals in it, which is quite intricate and detailed. Again, this goes along with that piece mold technology, so it's quite a developed form of art. Moving on, the next dynasty we discuss is the Zhou Dynasty. And they had a supreme deity named Tian, or heaven, and it is thought that the king on earth ruled as the son of heaven. So this is where the belief of the mandate of heaven comes about. And it is believed that this was actually used to justify the overthrowing of the Song Dynasty. So what it is Zhou leaders claimed that the Shang emperors had become corrupt, and unfit, so heaven demanded their removal. So you could be a ruler and be ruling well, and you have good rains for the agriculture, you have a good balance of sun, of course, for your agriculture, and life is going along well. And if there was a drought of some sort, then the people would say, hey, the ruler isn't doing his job. The ruler is ruling as the son of heaven. He is supposed to be that intermediary connecting our world with the other world in order to benefit us. And if the king is not doing that and we are ending up in a drought situation or there are floods of some sort, then he is unfit to rule. So that's what the mandate of heaven is. And eventually, as I mentioned, this is what it is believed the Zhou Dynasty used to overthrow the Song Dynasty. Now, just so you guys know, warfare at this time was pretty cruel. So they would take convicted criminals, for example, and send them in front of the main army, and the criminals were forced to kill themselves right in front of their rivals, and the rivals would be so shocked. They would be looking at this army of people killing themselves, and they would think, whoa, what's happening? And that little shock, that moment of shock, would lead for the Zhou army to move in and conquer them. So warfare was quite a thing at this time, we'll say. So we start to see the Zhou Dynasty develop a little bit greater. Again, I'm showing you a map from the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and this, you might notice there's a different spelling. This is common if you guys study any ancient cultures where there are different different ways of spelling names and proper nouns. So this is just a Romanized version, a westernized version of the Zhou Dynasty. But I want to mention something else, and this is something, if you've ever taken a class of mine, you'll hear me say, whenever there's upheaval in society, there's upheaval in art, there's upheaval in life, things change, things shift. So the Zhou Dynasty didn't go without its problems. There was a time period where authority was crippled, and then after that authority was crippled, the Zhou Dynasty broke apart into warring states. So just to give you an idea where we are, I've had some dates on the screen you guys can see as we're going along, but 481 to 221 BCE, that's before the zero changeover. So we have warring states, and what this does is lead to philosophers who develop some philosophies, and we start to see a shift from that supernatural concept of ancestor worship, for example, in the other world, to the more human world. And politics start to become part of the art and the culture as well. So this is a bell. It's from Master Lai's bell, and he made this for his dad. It was once a set of 8, and there are other sets that are actually complete. Sometimes they're up to 12 bells as well. And there's an inscription on here, and you can read this in your book, that they would ring the bell to gladden his ancestors and to pray for good fortune. There is also an inscription on this bell that references the politician at the time. The Zhou ruler, who was ruling as the son of heaven, gave Master Lai some more political responsibility, and he wanted to thank the politician, basically, the ruler. So when he rang this bell, he was ringing it not only for his ancestors, but also as part of political practice. So there you can see a shift. Now we're talking about politics, we're talking about rulers, and they are part of the artwork we look at this time. The next really important era is the Qin Dynasty. Qin Shi Huangdi was a ruler who was quite ruthless, actually. He did a number of things that was beneficial to China in order to unify it under one rule, but he also did a number of atrocious things as well. One of the worst things he did is scholar officials who disagreed with him, he had him buried alive, and they say there are about 460 of those scholar officials buried alive, and their books were then burned. On the other hand, he standardized many things. He standardized weights and measures, and he standardized things like the width of roads. And also, this is where the Chinese writing develops and they start to unify. So take a look at the size of Qin's dynasty here. You can start to see it really develop. Now on this slide, you might notice there is the little black zigzag, which represents the Great Wall. So this is the Great Wall we see in tourist pamphlets today, right? So we're familiar with the large stone Great Wall. But I want you guys to know there is not just one Great Wall. There are many. And this is not the Great Wall that Emperor Qin built. I'm going to show you what Emperor Qin built. It's basically mud brick, beaten down earth mud. And they even say today there are parts of this wall that are disintegrating so rapidly that there'll be a time that we won't even see what was Emperor Qin's Great Wall. And it's the mud brick wall, not the stone wall. This is developed later. We see the stone wall under the Ming and Qing dynasties, which we'll talk about later. Now, Emperor Qin was so significant in unifying this large portion of China, which is roughly, not so much, but about half of what China is today, of the landmass of China today, which is quite large. But he's the one who gave his name to China. And so here where you see the Romanized version of his name, so it's CH and you see the IN, this is what is the reason China is named China, is it's after Emperor Qin, and it is due to him unifying such a large section. The other major project that Emperor Qin is known for is the building of his great tomb. So there's this huge mound. Now this tomb was always known, it was there, people knew it, it was probably his tomb. This tomb has not been entered in. The mercury levels are very high, and you guys know mercury is something that is a poisonous substance to us today. Now, Emperor Qin was really paranoid. There were actually 3 assassination attempts on his life, and it is believed that he was seeking some sort of substance that would give him immortality so he could live forever. And in that process of trying to discover a substance that would lead to immortality, there is the belief that he drank mercury, and that may have led to his decline. But he was paranoid. So outside this tomb, which again has not been opened yet, on a side note, check out the video. I posted a video called Engineering an Empire, China. I labeled a couple of time placements in that video for you guys to jump to, just to get you right to the meat of what I want you to see. At around 11 minutes, the video will talk about the building of the Great Wall, and around 18 minutes, they'll talk about the building of this tomb, and there's also a recreation of what they think it might look like inside. Again, it has not been opened. It's not safe to open it today. So maybe sometime in our life, they'll come up with the correct or the right or the best way to gain entry into this tomb, and perhaps we could see, a brand new discovery, which I think would be really exciting. In the 1970s, it was 1974, there was a farmer who was digging a well, and he discovered these tombs with these terracotta armies in them. So the main tomb, of course, is the large mound, as you know, but we also have the terracotta army over here in this section in the background, and there are other armor pits and other pits that have terracotta statues, life-size terracotta statues, and this is what it looks like inside these pits. These are life-size terracotta figures. They are basically his infantry. These are those protecting his tomb. Again, he was paranoid. And so all around his tomb, we have these types of guardian figures, we might even call them. It's his military. So these were discovered in 1974. Excavations are still taking place. So if I were just to give you a general idea, there are tens of thousands of life-size figures, both human and horses, in these pits. And there are so many of them that I sort of sometimes joke that, China can give them up. So China sends them on exhibition to many museums around the world because they have so many of them. They can do that. So it would not surprise me if at some point in your guys' life at a museum here or there, you may have seen some of these in person. But it's quite remarkable, and it really speaks to, this empire that Emperor Qin developed. After Qin's death, those who suffered under him revolted, and they founded the Han Dynasty. So that's where we're going next, to the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty is roughly 400 years, and it transitions us from the BCE era, before the Big Zero changeover, to the Common Era, which is 220. Now, those philosophical ideas of Taoism and Confucianism, these were formulated under the Zhou Dynasty when they had the Warring States period. These now become central to Chinese thought. So I'm going to be introducing you guys to these ideas: Taoism and Confucianism. Something else that happened in the Han Dynasty is the development of the Silk Road, the extension of the Silk Road. Now, you guys know in previous lectures I talked about the importance of the Silk Road going through India from the Mediterranean, from ancient Greece, and from ancient Rome through India. And we saw during King Kanishka's era how we had Greco-Roman stylistic influences from Greece and Rome making its way into India, right? Well, that continues on. And so here on our map of the Han Dynasty, which continues to get larger, right? They're filling out from the previous era. You can see this one mark of orange, which is really marking where the Silk Road came in to China. It eventually landed here in Chong'an. But this is the Silk Road. And again, remember, it brings influences from the Mediterranean through India into China. So you will see Greco-Roman influences start to infiltrate China. And of course, you have Indian influences as well. So this transmigration of influences due to the trading route of the Silk Road. Now, there was a tomb that was excavated in 1972 for somebody named Lady Di. Very elaborate tomb with a lot of burial goods. She was nestled in a series of coffins, and this is actually her body. They can actually move her limbs. They believe that the Han rulers were also really obsessed with immortality, and so maybe she figured something out at some point. Because if I recall, they were able to actually get a vessel of her blood. Like, they were actually able to retrieve blood from her body. So that's remarkable. But in terms of the art world, one of the really remarkable objects that was located in the burial is this funerary banner. And it is believed that it is actually a portrait of Lady Di here as she is transcending various worlds. This is full of symbolism, guys. I'm not going to go over all the symbols. You can definitely read about them in the book. They're fascinating. I'll point out a couple of different areas here. This upper area seems to be the other world, or the heavens. Lots of symbols again, like the crow in the sun, for example, is an important symbol. We also have this platform right here, and it shows us Lady Di. You guys may have found the Khan Academy website, and they have some pretty good detailed images of this banner. So if it's something you want to dig into for the visual analysis, definitely check out that site as well. They have some really good images that you can focus on. But anyways, believe that this is Lady Di, and though she's on some sort of a platform, and that this platform is going to come up, and you can see there are two men here, and on either side there are some columns, and perhaps this is sort of her entryway into heaven. We also see two dragons on either side. Their bodies move through a B disc. Remember I talked about the B disc? So it's like that B disc, that round disc, separates heaven from the rest of the scene, which is down here. It is believed that this center area is life on Earth, and that under this canopy there's ceremonies like ancestor type ceremonies. And then at the very, very bottom, this might be the underworld. right? So we have the underworld, the human realm, and then the heavens represented here. There's a lot going on in regards to nature and some of these ideas that some believe that this is proto-Taoist. Like, it's not full-on Taoism, but there's some references to it. I have to tell you guys on a side note, when I look at artwork, I often think of other things I've seen in life, but when I think of Lady Di on this platform and I imagine it bouncing up, it made me think of a video game, and I thought like instantly of Mario Brothers, like going back to these weird platforms leading you to other worlds. So it just made me think, nothing's really new in this world. It isn't that interesting to think about. Like maybe some of the ideas here in Mario Brothers came from Lady Di's silk banner. So this is made of silk. Silk was made in China. And by the way, the Western world, Greece and Rome, loved the silk from China. And so this is again why the Silk Road is partially named the Silk Road, because of the silks that came from China. Okay, I'm going to discuss Taoism and Confucianism to you guys now. And I'm going to try to keep this simple. I'm going to stick with philosophical Taoism today. Lao Tzu is the guy who normally gets the credit for writing text, or this philosophy that values nature and naturalness. This, again, comes from the Zhou Dynasty during the Warring States. So he was writing his ideas down, but they do believe that this text called The Way actually was written by a number of individuals. But it teaches that the world does not revolve around people. So this is the way. It promotes independent, unconventional thinking and behavior. And it really is about nature. Nature, nature, nature. In fact, we make these references to nature. So the way is meant to be flowing and effortless. So we think about, well, what's flowing and effortless? That would be a river, right? So if you flow down the river, you can get far without putting much effort into it. But if you try to go up the river, you have to put a lot of effort in, and you're not going to get as far. So go with the way. That's Taoism. Like, make it effortless. We also make references to water because water is yielding. It can yield around a rock as it's flowing down a river, but over time, it'll wear down that rock as well. So this is the idea of the way, and it's about nature. It's about naturalness. Again, it's not about people. It promotes independent, unconventional thinking and behavior, which is great for artists who want to go, and poets who want to go off and go out to the woods and just experience nature, get back to who they were as people, and create art. So it really fits great with artists. And this is one of those works that we would say would fall under Taoism. It was found in a burial. It's a hill-shaped incense burner. So they would actually have incense in here, and there are little holes, and incense would come out of that hole. So it looked like it's mist around this landscape, which when we look at paintings next week, mist in landscapes become a really common thing that we see. If you can get a close-up view of this, maybe you can see here, there are little tiny figures roaming the mountainside, very small. So again, this is part of that Taoism, that people are going to nature, and it's about nature. People and animals, they're secondary. You don't notice them as much as you notice the mountain. Now, Confucianism is a political philosophy, and this comes from the teachings of Confucius. Again, he lived during that Warring States period, and he was trying to get someone to listen to him and his political ideas in order to try to bring peace and promote harmony in that time period where it was warring states. Confucianism focuses on people. So if you're trying to remember that Taoism is nature, Confucianism focuses on people. And Confucian teachings promote goodness and filial piety, which means respect for your parents. There are actually 5 specific relationships that this social hierarchy needs to be respected in order for society to be harmonious. So you have father over son, ruler over subject, husband over wife, not my favorite one, older brother over younger brother, and equality among friends. And if this social hierarchy is respected, then there is goodness, and that goodness is what would keep society together. Rulers had to be taught goodness, as did people. So everybody had to understand these relationships. And again, this would lead to a harmonious society. So I've got a number of examples to show you for Confucianism, and I have more examples to show you of Taoism as well. So let's go through and I'll show you some of these. This is the Wu family shrine. You can see it's stonework. And so this is something you'll see in our text quite a bit this week, is there are stone there's this relief, really low relief here. And they've taken rubbings of that relief, and that's what we look at in the book. So that's the image we're looking at. It's easier to see than looking at the stone. So this is an ink rubbing. This is a fairly complicated story. You can read about it in the textbook a little bit more, but it basically demonstrates Confucianism. So during Emperor Qin's era, there was this refugee in a rival court, and that refugee is represented here by this head, because he told his the rival of Emperor Qin was this prince, and he told the prince, you can use me, you can behead me and take my head in order to get an audience with Emperor Qin. And Jing Ke is the man who said, I'll bring the head and I'll also try to kill Emperor Qin. So Jing Ke is shown here, and he threw a poison dagger. This is the poison dagger, and it hits this pole. This is Emperor Qin fleeing. Remember, Emperor Qin gave his name to China. He had 3 assassination attempts, and this was one of them. So what we're seeing with Jing Ke and also the refugee is that they gave up themselves for the good of their ruler, the prince, the rival prince who wanted Emperor Qin dead. So these are subjects of a ruler. So this would be that relationship, ruler over subject. So this would be a Confucius work of art. Now we're moving into the period of disunity, or called the period of 6 dynasties. There are also northern and southern dynasties. Here's what I want you guys to know about this era. It was a really complex era. There were numerous dynasties and ruling regions. So what I just need you guys mostly to know for this time period is that there was a lot of upheaval. And again, when we hear about upheaval in society, changes come, changes develop in society, people change their focus to something else. There's a new something that they're interested in. There's upheaval in the world. So just note that for this time period. I'm going to be walking you guys through some more works of art that show Taoism and Confucianism. They continue to develop in China. And I'm also going to walk you through some art historical concepts as well. So let's just show you the map of 6 dynasties. You can, of course, see the Silk Road there is still prominent and important, as that there's like that little arm of the orange that goes off to the left there, headed towards the Mediterranean. Now, this is another one of those rubbings of stamped bricks. So this depicts 7 sages of the bamboo grove and Rong Chi Chi. I want you guys to look at it and just take a guess before I give you the answer, of course. Do you think that this is Confucius or Taoist? I've split this in half and zoomed in, so I'm going to show you that so you can see it a little bit more closer. So we see a number of individuals. Some are playing musical instruments, like this guy here. Some are just completely relaxing. Some have clothes coming off their shoulder, like this guy. He seems to be drinking. You also have this man over here sitting back, relaxing and smoking. And so, what would you guys say? Confucianism, where it's about this relationship of people to maintain harmony, or the focus on nature and how humans in nature can participate in unconventional behavior? So you guys probably picked Taoism. So Taoism is about nature. These individuals, yes, they're people, but they're in nature. And this is where they're getting back to their natural self. And they're just living unconventional lives. Here's another work. It's difficult to see. This is a panel that comes from a sarcophagus. And there are a number of scenes. It's a narrative story being told here. So I'm just going to point out, you can see some figures here. And I've got actually a detail to show you these scenes over here on the right-hand side. So let's just go to that. So here's the story. Here's Grandpa. So Yangu is this boy, and Yangu was asked by his father to help take Grandpa out to the woods. So they could no longer afford Grandpa. They were an impoverished household. So they brought Grandpa out to the woods, and they were going to leave him there. And Yangu, he didn't think that this was right to do this. This is not how you respect your father. This would be, of course, his father's father, the grandfather. And so he picks up the carrier that they used to carry Grandpa out to the woods on. And the father turns and looks at him and says, "Hey, what are you doing picking that back up? Why do you need that?" And Yangu says, "Well, someday we'll need it to bring you out to the forest." And so he didn't want to criticize his father directly, because in Confucius belief, you respect your parents. So you wouldn't say, "Hey, Dad, you're doing a wrong thing." But rather, he picks up the stretcher and says, "Well, we'll have to use this on you, won't we? Just like you did to your father." So he let his father know that what he was doing was wrong without directly criticizing him. And of course, his father said, "Oh, you're right. We can't leave Grandpa out in the woods." And they end up bringing Grandpa home. And here's just another scene of them carrying Grandpa on a stretcher. So then the story being told here again is respect for your parents. And that would fall under Confucianism. Okay, now shifting gears, we're going to talk about these canons. These are these art historical ideas. Now, if you've taken a Western art history class, you'll notice that sometimes when we're talking about Western art history, we say things like color, sometimes in certain artist circles, is more important than form. Or sometimes we talk about how form was more important than color. And so they don't work often together. Often they work against each other. Well, in Chinese painting and Chinese art, they try to make these work together. So we have this Chinese man, Xia, who wrote these canons, and they've been translated. James Cahill is a scholar in Chinese painting, and this list that you see on the screen are his translations. Our book has similar but slightly different translations. So this, I'm just going to show you what comes from our textbook. So this is what was the most important in Chinese painting. Number one was spirit resonance, providing a sense of vitality. The artist needed to give the figures that he depicted a sense of life and vitality. The artist needed to use the brush to simulate structure. So the way you hold the brush, the type of line you use with your brush, basically being able to adapt to the brush and use that to communicate information is really important. So the instrument, the tool you're using is really important. Creating naturalistic form, proportions that are accurate, for example, naturalistic color, and then composition. Composition is how you arrange objects in a space. We'll note that we don't see Western traditions like linear perspective in China. So the composition, they employ other techniques. And then they also promote copying. So you would copy elements of earlier paintings in order to transit the experience of the past. So this is something that they would do. So you'll see, by the way, when the reason why I mentioned that, it's not really it's not super important for us in our class, but you'll notice if you're reading the slides and in the text, it'll often say this is a copy of a previous time period. But like the artwork from the previous time period doesn't exist. So the copying of artwork is really important, and it helps us piece together the various influences over the eras. So I'm going to show you guys this work here. This is a hand scroll. It was meant to be wound up like in a scroll, and you would unwind a section at a time. This is just one part of a longer hand scroll. And it's quite fascinating when you get to the very long scrolls. So I don't have an example here, but the one next week I'll show you one which is like 28 feet long. And so you could tell your story. You would participate with the hand scrolls and unroll it as fast as you wanted or as slow as you wanted. There might be a part you wanted to linger on a little bit more and a part you wanted to go over faster. So that's the medium, this hand scroll. It's a typical medium in China. I wanted to mention that because what I like about it is that the viewer participates with the artwork. In Western art history, you just stand outside, look at a painting and say, okay, there's a painting. You don't touch it. You don't participate with it. But in China, participating with it was part of this vitality in the extent of having a viewer be engaged with the artwork. And again, this is probably a copy of a previous work of art again, example of copying. So this is Lady Feng and the bear, and here's the story. So there was a circus bear that got out and threatened, here's the circus bear, and threatened the ruler, who's shown over here. And two of the ruler's servants tried to go forward to stop the bear with spears, but look at the fear on their faces. You really get a sense of that vitality and that energy of those figures. But more so, you get that vitality and energy with Lady Feng, and this is Lady Feng right here. And so she moves forward gracefully, unafraid of the circus bear, and she's going to protect her husband. You'll notice these streamers of ribbons that come from her, as well as here you have it with the emperor as well, or the ruler as well. It's like his shock. And I feel like this is like cartoon type stuff. Like his shock made these ribbons and his hair bounce up because he's so shocked by this bear. That's the vitality that we were talking about. This is called wire line painting. That has to do with that brush stroke that I mentioned. So you see the wire lines, very thin little wire lines. Forms are accurate, colors are accurate, and then the placement in the composition. Figures closer to us are farther below, figures farther away are higher in space, and that's how we see the natural world around us. So these are this is a good example to show you those canons. Okay, hopefully this helps round it out. And if you need to go back and re-listen to this section, go ahead. I won't spend more time on it though. Last but not least, if you guys were to pick, is this Taoism or Confucianism? Is this about people in nature, or the focus on nature, or the naturalness of things, or is it one of those 5 relationships? And here it would be actually 2 of those relationships. So it is Confucius. You have ruler or subject, ruler over subject, and of course, husband over wife. That's Confucius. Okay, during the period of disunity, 6 dynasties, remember, this is a time of upheaval. Buddhism really develops. Buddhism arrived during the Han Dynasty, and I'm actually going to show you a work of art from the Han Dynasty first. There is some controversy. Not every scholar agrees that it is from the Han Dynasty, but it makes sense that Buddhism arrived during that time period, since that was when the development of the Silk Road occurred, and the Silk Road cut through India. Now, Buddhism evolves in China to accommodate certain elements of the native belief system. So Buddhism actually goes against Confucianism, right? But there are parts of Taoism that work with Buddhism. Like, think about it. If you guys remember our historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, which was Prince Siddhartha Gautama, right? But remember, he went out to the woods and meditated. And leaving your family, he left his family. That goes against Confucianism. But he also left and was in the woods, so that connects with Taoism. So Buddhism sort of has to accommodate these other belief systems. It's not perfect, but it does develop that way. And so I just am showing you guys a map again of the Silk Road into China, and how that has such a strong influence in bringing foreign ideas into a place like China. So this is Shakyamuni, our historical Buddha, and this is dated 338. Again, some scholars do not agree with that dating system. But it's interesting when you look at this Buddha, there are a lot of elements that look like your Greek influences, such as the robe, the way the robe hangs, or the face in general. The hands are across the stomach. Now, these hands, if you guys remember, we called them mudras. Do you remember when I taught you guys that? Or you read about it in the book if you didn't watch my lecture. And the mudra for meditation would be that these palms would be straight up. But again, remember, this is now made in China. So the influences come over, but there's maybe a disconnect. There's a misunderstanding of what the meditation mudra is. So it looks instead like this Buddha is holding his stomach, like he has a stomach ache or something. Later on, a couple hundred years later, we have another image. This shows you Shakyamuni and Prabhadaratna. Prabhadaratna is one of the other Buddhas. So this is where we start to see a development of Buddhism, and it gets a little complicated. So Prabhadaratna is Buddha of the distant past. Okay. Shakyamuni is the historical Buddha, or the historic Buddha. We know that as Prince Siddhartha Gautama. And Maitreya is Buddha of the future. So you guys, when we talked about bodhisattvas, remember that they were enlightened beings, but they chose to stay in this world to help others become enlightened. They would be Buddhas of the future. Like their time will come, right? So we start to see many additional Buddhas develop. Prabhadaratna and Shakyamuni depicted here are depicted in this leg posture, if you look at their leg postures, which means they're very comfortable with each other. And it means that there is this effortless transition from Buddhism of the past to Buddhism of the historical era to Buddhism of the future. There's a connection, by the way, with that last sculpture and wireline painting. If you want to know more about it, let me know. And then we also have these large colossal structures in China that develop of our colossal Shakyamuni, but we also have smaller Buddha figures. Now keep in mind, over time, this cave has eroded away, so it's not as protected. These are grottos. There are a number of these. You can read about them in your text. These were like areas of like a spot of like an oasis spot on the Silk Road. The Silk Road was a treacherous journey, by the way. This was not like, hey, this is going to be a fun travel experience. It was treacherous. So they have these oasis cities where people could stop and rest. I'm going to show you straight on of that work I just showed you. So our center figure is Shakyamuni, our historical Buddha. It is believed then that the Buddha on the right here is Maitreya, or Buddha of the future. And then that originally there was a Buddha on the left-hand side, which would have represented Buddha of the distant past. You might notice the smile on these figures' faces. This is a smile that we call in ancient Greece the archaic smile. And that archaic smile it's a real stiff, weird look, a weird, stiff smile. And it is used here again, and it represents the influence of Greece here in China. And then here's one more to show you the Shakyamuni in attendance. And I think that archaic smile is even more present here. So you can see the expression on the face. The robes hang much like you see in ancient Greece. We also have Buddhas. We know that they're Buddhas because remember, Buddha has the long ear. And so these two figures are Buddha figures. So we would say, okay, Buddha of the distant past, Buddha, our historical Buddha, and then Buddha of the future. There are other figures represented here, and these figures are monks. They have shaved heads, which is a symbol of humility. So we have the monks there as well. So we'll be dabbling in and out of Buddhism as we continue on now that it has arrived in China. So if you were interested in Buddhism, it continues on. I mentioned to you guys in India that Buddhism essentially dies out. Here we see where Buddhism has a new life of its own. But look at and check out some of the works of art where you see them talk about how they adapt some of the ideas of Buddhism to fit with their native traditional belief systems. And then one more thing I want to mention, there's a Western Pure Land Buddhism, and it's another Buddha that rules over this land. and his name is Amitabha. We'll learn more about Amitabha as we go through. This isn't the end. And you guys know we're after China, we go to Korea. After Korea, we go to Japan. And just so you guys know, these influences from the Mediterranean through India, now through China, will then spread to Korea, and then it spreads to Japan. And so we talk about Amitabha, the Buddha of the Western Pure Land, as Amida in Japan. Basically, Western Pure Land, if you follow this belief system, this is really basically it. This is my last slide for you guys today. This is basically it. You are the world in which you were living was too corrupt to be able to reach enlightenment. So you have to be born into the Western Pure Land, and once you're born there, then your enlightenment is deemed for sure. So you will for sure become enlightened in this world if you get to the Western Pure Land. So you can see figures being reborn into the Western Pure Land in this little pool. I think this is so cute, these little anecdotal details. So you've got some fully formed figures on lotus flowers and some who are still in their lotus flower, not quite born in the Western Pure Land. And of course, we have jewels and wonderful plants and buildings. You know, this is supposed to be like dream world, right? Because this is where you want to be born into, because then your enlightenment is assured. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Trying to keep these short, but they just get long, I know. So have a good week, and we'll come back next week and talk a little bit about calligraphy. That's where we pick up, and then we move on. Okay, have a good week, everybody. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, bye now.